Good morning, everyone. Let me introduce myself. My name is Ivy Heng from Singapore Business Federation FTA team. I'll be responsible for hosting this webinar this morning. Thank you for joining us this morning and welcome to our second FTA webinar series for the logistics and transportation sector. This webinar series is jointly brought to you by Singapore Business Federation and Singapore Logistics Association. We would also like to express our thanks to Singapore Customs and Enterprise Singapore and Land Transport Authority who supported us for both webinar series. Today, we are very honored to have Mr. Rajiv and Mdm Fauziah from Singapore Customs to share on ASEAN-Wide Self Certification and Custom Procedure and Trade Facilitation, and Ms. Priscilla to share briefly on Tariff Finder. Allow me to remind you that should you have any questions, please kindly post them in the Q&A box in the Zoom function. Thank you. Without any further delay, let me invite Mr. Jason Lee, Director of SBF FTA team, for his opening remarks. Over to you, Jason. Thanks.
Thank you, Ivy, and a very good morning. On behalf of the SBF Free Trade Agreement Education and Outreach team, welcome to the second part of our FTA webinar series for the logistics and transport sector. This series also follows our workshop for the food manufacturing sector and is part of our effort to customize our services and make FTAs more relevant for key industries. We are happy to be working with the Singapore Logistics Association for today's webinar. The logistics and transport sector is not only a key pillar of Singapore's economy, contributing $6.8 billion annually to our GDP, but also an essential industry for a country like ours that thrives on trade. It enables a host of other sectors, such as manufacturing, wholesale trade, and increasingly e-commerce. Today, we'll be hearing from Mr. Rajiv from Singapore Customs on the ASEAN-Wide Self Certification and back-to-back provisions. With greater ASEAN economic integration and most of our raw materials used by our companies originating from the region, these are certainly important features to understand in order to maximize FTA benefits for Singapore origin goods. Unclear customs procedures and requirements is also consistently the top trade barrier our businesses say they face with our major trading partners. So I'm especially happy to have Mdm Fauziah from Singapore Customs here to elaborate on the efforts of Singapore Customs with the overseas counterparts to improve custom procedures and help Singapore businesses lower the cost and complexity while improving the certainty and time to market of our cross-border trade. Finally, my colleague Priscilla will be introducing the Tariff Finder tool. This free-to-use tool is convenient, easy to understand, and extremely useful to find out the MFN tariff, all applicable Singapore FTAs, and relevant rules of origin to help you make a decision on whether and which FTA you can use. Companies which have used it have all given it great reviews, and we use it ourselves too. So I highly recommend that you register for an account and try out for yourself after this webinar. If you have any queries after this webinar too, please feel free to write in to us. Our email is fta@sbf.org.sg. Our team of former FTA users in the private sector themselves, some former government officers, have been assisting businesses at all stages of the FTA journey. This ranges from considering and exploring the different FTAs, issues they've encountered during and after using FTAs. We've run this complimentary service for close to 2 years now, working closely with various government agencies on a range of issues. Last year, we answered 188 queries. So please write in to us. We want to know the issues you face, the considerations you have, and your FTA experience. Now, without further ado, I'll hand back time over to Ivy and Mr. Rajiv for the first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Now we invite Rajiv to share more on ASEAN-Wide Self Certification and back-to-back provision. Rajiv, please.
Hi, a very good morning to everyone. My name is Rajiv. I'm from the Rules of Origin Department in Singapore Customs. So today I'll be doing a sharing session on the ASEAN-Wide Self Certification Scheme, as well as the back-to-back certificate of origin provisions under the various FTAs. So without further ado, let's begin. I think there's quite a bit to cover. The agenda for the sharing session today would be that I will do a quick overview of the ASEAN-Wide Self Certification Scheme, or what we will call throughout this slide as AWSC, the benefits of AWSC, the requirements to utilize AWSC, that is the registration to be a certified exporter. So another term that we're using throughout this, this presentation is certified exporter, which we will then be using CE, followed by how to use AWSC, the documentation requirements, the obligations as a CE, then subsequently we will end the presentation with the back-to-back certificate of origin provisions under the various FTAs. So let's start by the overview and benefits of AWSC. So the ASEAN-Wide Self Certification Scheme is the unified self-certification scheme that was implemented under the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement, or what we all call ATIGA. So previously, before the ASEAN-Wide Self Certification Scheme, there was two different pilot project schemes, which we call SCPP1, which Singapore was a part of, as well as SCPP2, which Singapore was not a part of. So since the implementation of AWSC on 20th of September last year, all 10 ASEAN member states have come together to form the ASEAN-Wide Self-Certification Scheme. Next slide, please. So the benefits of AWSC, basically they provide greater facilitation. So they facilitate inter-ASEAN trade among all ASEAN member states. It's fast and easy. So by becoming a certified exporter under ASEAN-Wide Self-Certification, you do not have any waiting time whereby you do not have to provide any cost statements for the products you're exporting to Singapore Customs, whereby you can self-certify the products at any point of time, thereby simplifying the export procedures. Lastly, it also lowers the business cost because basically you do not need to apply for any cost statements, which save the business ample amount of time and cost. So how does AWSC work? So this is a quick illustration. So basically the exporter will then apply to be a certified exporter with Singapore Customs. Singapore Customs will assess the exporter and then subsequently once they meet the criteria, they will then be authorized to be a certified exporter. At the same time, Singapore Customs will input the information into the CE database. Once the exporter has been approved to be a certified exporter, they can right away make up the origin declarations to export the products under ATIGA. They can then dispatch the origin declaration to their importer over in the importing ASEAN member states. The importer can then present the origin declaration to the importing authority of the ASEAN member state, who would then check the information against the CE database. And if everything tallies, the goods can be granted preferential tariff treatment. So the requirements to utilize AWSC. So this is just a quick illustration. Basically, to utilize AWSC, you need to check your company's eligibility to be a certified exporter. Once you're eligible, you can then submit the application form to be a certified exporter, which includes product details, and then register with Singapore Customs. So once you are successful, you can then make out an origin declaration and fulfill all CE obligations. So I will elaborate more on the three protocols I just mentioned earlier. So the requirements to utilize AWSC is that all exporters who wish to utilize AWSC will be required to submit an application to be registered as a certified exporter. Later on, further down in the slides, I will explain what is needed for you to provide in the application to be registered as a certified exporter. So each exporter, upon submitting the application, will be assessed on its eligibility. All applications submitted to Singapore Customs will be processed within 7 working days. So the eligibility or the criteria to be a certified exporter is based upon Rule 12A of the Operational Certification Procedures in ATIGA. So basically what we require the exporter to follow before becoming a certified exporter is that they have to be registered in the exporting member state, that is in Singapore. They have to know and understand all the rules of origin criteria under ATIGA. They have good experience in import and export. They have no record of rules of origin fraud. They have a good compliance record. And if they are not the manufacturer, but instead a trader, they would need to have a manufacturer's declaration letter. And should there be a retroactive check and verification, they should be ready to provide all the necessary information. Lastly, they need to have sound bookkeeping and record keeping system. So in the application to be a CE, what you need to provide to Singapore Customs is that you need to provide the item that you'll be exporting under AWSC. And if you're not the manufacturer, you can provide the manufacturer's declaration letter to Singapore Customs. You'll need to provide the 6-digit HS code of the product. You will then also need to provide the authorized signatories and their respective specimen signatures up to a maximum of 10. Just to touch base more on the authorized signatories. So the signatures have to be manually applied. They are still not approved to be digitally applied yet. So when you are submitting the specimen signatures to Singapore Customs, please provide the manual application of the authorized signatories. So for Singapore companies exporting goods in a back-to-back arrangement, what you need to provide to Singapore Customs is that you need to provide a valid first leg proof of origin. That is, it can be a hard copy Form D, e-Form D, or even the origin declaration. And the manufacturer's declaration letter from the importing member state. So upon successful registration, each certified exporter will be issued with an authorization letter. So in the authorization letter, what will be stated is the validity period of your CE registration, the good as well as the HS sub-aiding of the item that you have registered to make out the origin declaration on, your obligations as a certified exporter or CE, as well as the terms and conditions to be a certified exporter. So once you have been successfully registered, what Customs will do is that Customs will put all this information into the ASEAN-Wide Self Certification database so that all the importing authorities from the other ASEAN member states can check against the information and also check against the information made out on the origin declaration to make sure that it tallies. So how to utilize AWSC, that is the documentation requirements. So the CE, once you've been approved, you can make out the origin declaration on the commercial invoice. But let's say you do not have the commercial invoice at the point of exporting your products, you can also make out on any of the commercial documents such as the billing statement, delivery order, or packing list. So there is also a minimum data requirement that is required for all CEs to be placed in the commercial document prior to the exportation of the products. So basically what is required is that you will need to have the certified exporter detail, which is the CE authorization code. You'll need to have the description of the goods, which is the product name, the 6-digit HS code, the origin conferring criterion, the country of origin, the FOB price when RVC used. Just to take note, under Rule 25A, the FOB price is only to be indicated if the good is exported to Indonesia, Cambodia, or Laos. So the other 7 ASEAN member states do not require the FOB price to be indicated if you use the RVC criteria. Subsequently, you need to indicate the quantity of goods, the trademark, and if you are doing a back-to-back origin declaration, you need to include the proof of origin reference number, date of issuance, country of origin of the first exporting country, and if applicable, the CE authorization code of the exporter from the first exporting country. Lastly, you also need to have a certification made by the authorized signatory. So the certification by an authorized signatory of the CE needs to be made to specify that they meet all the relevant requirements and they understand the rules of origin criteria under ATIGA. So, sorry. So I think this part here will be really applicable to most of you over here. So CEs are allowed to nominate a third-party declaring agent or freight forwarder to be an authorized signatory. So the signatory does not necessarily need to be the CE coming from the CE company themselves. They can authorize a third-party declaring agent or a freight forwarder to be an authorized signatory. Just wanted to elaborate on this point because it might be really applicable for everyone here. Okay, so this is a quick example of an origin declaration under AWSC. So this is what Singapore Customs has created to help facilitate a template for you guys that you can use. So if you can see, we have the name of the products, the HS in the 6-digit or AHGN code, the origin conferring criteria, the FOB value, the quantity of the goods, and if you have a trademark, the trademark, subsequently the declaration made at the bottom. Next slide. Yeah. So this is just a very quick example that we have done. So if you can see, this is an origin declaration made on the invoice. So you have the invoice number, the invoice date, the bill to and attention to, and subsequently all the information there at the bottom. So what happens after the OD is made out? So the origin declaration made out with the manually applied signatories should be dispatched to your customers. It will then be presented to all the importing authorities, who will then check the information against the CE database and subsequently allow the company to claim preferential tariff treatment. So the obligations as a certified exporter. So basically, if you are a certified exporter, there are also certain obligations that you need to fulfill to retain your CE status. So what you need to do is you need to ensure continuous compliance to the ATIGA rules of origin and operational certification procedures. You need to ensure registration conditions is satisfied in the authorization letter. You need to maintain up-to-date records of origin declaration made out. Furnish the required information at the request of customs during a post-exportation check should there be made one. And if you have any information that is being changed in the C database, you will need to update customs as soon as possible. And also, if there's a verification request being raised by the importing authorities, you need to be ready to provide all the necessary information to Singapore Customs. So this is some admin stuff that we just want to highlight to all you guys. So if you are doing the export permit declaration, so during the export permit declaration for the shipment, it is mandatory that you select the PRI indicator under the preferential indicator field on TradeNet. Let's say you do not know where this field is, don't worry. You can check with your TradeNet front-end solution vendor and they'll be able to locate this field for you. So basically, this is just a snapshot of where the field is. The preference duty indicator is usually below the invoice number, invoice date. But like I said, don't worry, if you do not know where the field is, you can check with your TradeNet front-end solution vendor. They will definitely know where this field is. So some important things to note, like I mentioned earlier, if you do fail to fulfill or comply with the CE obligations, it may result in the termination and revocation of the CE status. But having said that, just to incentivize AWSC a bit further, I'm sure you all have heard about the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that will be they will enter into force on 1st January 2020. So under the RCEP agreement, there is also an approved exporter scheme, very much like AWSC, and it will also be modeled under AWSC. So in future, if you choose to export your products under RCEP, being a certified exporter under AWSC can be a precursor to you becoming an approved exporter under RCEP. So don't worry, customs will share more details of this when the declaration of origin format is finalized next year. This is some information that you can access on your own free time. So Singapore Customs has a web page on AWSC. The link is over there. The ASEAN Secretariat also has a web page on AWSC, as the link shown there. And if you have any clarifications or inquiries, please do email them to us at this email below. We will try our best to get back to you as soon as possible. So with that being said, I've ended the session for AWSC, but let me move on to the back-to-back certificate of origin provisions under the various FTAs. So understand that everyone is interested in this obtaining a back-to-back certificate of origin. So just to touch base on this, the back-to-back preferential certificate of origin is issued by Singapore Customs for the re-export of goods based on the preferential certificate of origin that's issued by the first exporting country. So basically what this means is that let's say you're exporting your goods under a Form D or re-exporting your goods under a back-to-back Form D. The goods that are being imported into Singapore has to be brought in with a Form D. If it's not brought in with a Form D, you cannot obtain the back-to-back Form D. So currently Singapore is a party to 7 different free trade agreements in which COs are issued by issuing body that allow goods to be exported under the back-to-back provision. So the 7 different free trade agreements are listed below in the table shown in the slide. So how can the company be eligible for a back-to-back PCO or back-to-back preferential certificate of origin? So as mentioned earlier, the first exporting country, Singapore, and the final importing country has to be a party of the same FTA. The goods are imported into Singapore from the first exporting country and subsequently re-exported from Singapore to the final importing country. So if you are stopping over in any other country prior to going to the final importing country, the back-to-back certificate of origin might not be applicable. The importing of the goods into Singapore is covered by a preferential certificate of origin issued by the issuing authority in the first exporting country. The goods do not undergo any further processing in Singapore, and the goods fulfill the relevant requirements in the operational certification procedures of the FTA. So this is just a quick illustration, just to help everyone in understanding how the back-to-back works. So if you can see, let's say you have a manufacturer in Vietnam, from Vietnam, you then import in 1,000 units of their goods into Singapore with an original Form D. You then subsequently want to re-export the goods into 2 different countries, let's say Brunei and Indonesia. So you can then export the goods to Brunei. Let's say you want to export 500 units in May next year. So the validity period is still 1 year within the issuance period of the original Form D. So if you notice, 20th May is still within the validity period. Subsequently, you can also send the goods to Indonesia because you still have 500 units left. So you can send the goods in on 1st January, which is still within the validity period of the original Form D. So earlier on, I touched based on the ASEAN-Wide Self Certification Origin Declaration. So this is an example of a back-to-back origin declaration under the ASEAN-Wide Self Certification Scheme. So the only additional information that is required in the origin declaration is the original proof of origin reference number, the date of issuance of the original proof of origin, and if you do know the certified exporter authorization code, you can include the authorization code as well. So I think everyone here understands that ATIGA is the most widely used free trade agreement currently in Singapore. So what we have done is we have created 9 permutations on 3 different types of proof of origin in the back-to-back arrangement. So under ATIGA now you have 3 different modes of obtaining a CO. So you have the hard copy Form D, you have the e-Form D, or you can also have an origin declaration. So if you take the origin declaration permutation, you can have the origin declaration coming into Singapore. Subsequently, you can obtain a hard copy Form D from Singapore and then export the goods and then the back-to-back Form D. You can also have an origin declaration coming into Singapore. You can also obtain the back-to-back e-Artiga Form D from Singapore and export the goods out. Sorry. So then lastly, you also have the origin declaration coming in from Singapore. You can also, if you are a certified exporter, you can also export the goods under the origin declaration to your importing authorities, importing member states, sorry. Next slide, please. Yep, so this is also applicable for the hard copy Form D, is the same, and as well as the e-Artiga Form D. So the AWSC and RCEP also contain the back-to-back origin declaration provision. So as mentioned, if you do intend to export your products under RCEP in future, this would really be a good precursor for you to join AWSC because you will then really understand how this works. But it's also important to note that the goods need to fulfill the eligibility criteria when you are applying for a back-to-back preferential certificate of origin or completing a back-to-back origin declaration. One point we also want to emphasize is that there are certain free trade agreements like the ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement or the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement that require the goods to be only stored in a free trade zone or a customs approved warehouse. So if you do not store the goods upon importing the goods into in such an area upon importing the goods into Singapore, they will not be eligible for a back-to-back certificate of origin under those FTAs. There are also certain FTAs that require the importer of the goods in the intermediate party and the exporter who apply for the back-to-back PCO or preferential certificate of origin in the intermediate party to be the same. So I think with that, I've come to the end of my presentation. I understand that Ivy said that all your questions can be shared on the Q&A panel, so please do raise any questions you have and I will try my best to address them at the end of the session. Thank you very much. I will now hand the floor back to Ivy.
Thank you, Rajiv. We shall pass the floor over to Mdm Fauziah to share on the custom procedure and trade facilitation. Mdm Fauziah, please.
Thank you, Ivy. Good morning, everyone. I think some of you may have attended the previous session that I briefed on the ACTS and ASW. So today is to brief you on the Customs Procedures and Trade Facilitation Chapter, or the CPTF, which actually forms the basis of most of the ASEAN Trade Facilitation and other FTAs principles of Customs Procedures and Trade Facilitation chapters of these FTAs. Next slide, please. So for today, I will highlight to you the basis of the customs chapters and trade facilitation with respect to the background of the World Trade Organization Trade Facilitation Agreement, the customs procedures and trade facilitation, the key elements and benefits of the CPTF chapter, comparing the WTO TFA, the CPTPP, or the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, as well as the new Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or RCEP. Then we will look into the comparison of the key benefits of the FTAs. Some of the examples, there are more than what I will show in the slides. and also how do we enhance partnership with the trade. Next slide, please. This is the background of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, which was concluded in December 2013. It is a binding multilateral trade agreement between members of the World Trade Organization, and it entered into force on 22nd February 2017 upon ratification by 2/3 of WTO members. Singapore had ratified it on 8 January 2015, and which we were the second to ratify after Hong Kong. As of 18 March, there were 153 or 93.3% out of 164 countries have ratified the TFA. But I also noted that on 29 April 2021, Liberia has become the 154 members. So in total, there would be 93.9% members who have ratified the TFA. And what are the commitments of the WTO members with respect to trade facilitation? The aim of, previous slide. Okay, so the aim of this TFA is to tackle the barriers to trade posed by burdensome border requirements. And the commitment of the ratified countries would be to reduce red tape at the borders, from measures to ensure quicker release and clearance of goods to better cooperation between border agencies. It will also they will also be required to increase transparency and efficiency, reduce bureaucracy and corruption, and ultimately make trade simpler, faster, and more cost-effective. Next slide, please. What are customs' role in this FTA? Customs negotiates the CPTF chapters of the FTA agreements. Sometimes it is known as Customs Administration Chapter or Customs Procedures Chapter. And sometimes it's combined Customs Procedures and Trade Facilitation Chapter. So typically it is a subset of trade in goods. The chapter aims to secure preferential advantages for goods exported from Singapore. And customs implements these commitments or the provisions in the CPTF chapter, as well as they would also enforce applicable violations under our respective domestic laws, such as incorrect declarations or falsified documents. The overview and scope of the CPTF chapter would cover the key principles for the simplification, harmonization, standardization, and modernization of trade procedures, import and export processes. And the objective is, as mentioned earlier, is to reduce cross-border trade, transaction costs at the interface between business and customs administrations, and expedite movement, release, and clearance of goods. Next slide, please. These are the key elements of a CPTF chapter. I will elaborate further in the subsequent slides. So they would cover notification of proposed measures, publication of final regulations, advanced rulings, rapid release of goods, express shipments, single window and paperless trade, risk management, temporary admission of goods, and customs duties and taxes. Next, please. Let's now look at the following key trade facilitation elements and the benefits under the CPTF chapter. On notification of proposed measures, parties are required to provide advance notification to allow and take into consideration public comments on proposed amendments to their related regulations. And on the publication of final regulations, they are to provide greater clarity for companies on the customs requirements and trade procedures, and they must also make available the information in English. We note that many countries, their national language are not in English, but they are obliged to provide at least a translation of their laws in English. On advanced rulings, parties are to provide greater certainty for companies to apply for advanced rulings for their products and to maximize the coverage of these advanced rulings, for example, on the origin, on the classification, and on the valuation of the goods. The service standard would usually be required to be provided expeditiously as far as possible, and for example, within 30 days from submission of complete set of documents. And also with respect to the advance ruling validity, it is a set of for a minimum period of time, for example, not less than 3 years. Next slide, please. Parties are to expedite the release of goods within certain period of time upon arrival, such as within 48 hours. And for express shipments, they are to be expedited within certain period of time, such as within 4 or 6 hours. Next, parties are to facilitate electronic submission of information, preferably single submission to various competent authorities. For example, Singapore's Network Trade Platform, or NTP, which was launched in September 2018, is a one-stop trade and logistics ecosystem to facilitate cross-border paperless trade. This is to help improve companies' productivity and competitiveness. Next slide, please. On risk management, parties are to conduct cargo clearance based on risk management for targeting, focusing on high-risk goods. This would expedite the release of low-risk goods. And for goods on temporary admission, parties are to secure duty-free treatment of specified goods temporarily imported, as in the example shown here. On customs duties and taxes, parties are to secure duty-free treatment of specified goods temporarily imported, as in the examples shown here. And for customs duties and taxes, parties are to strive to determine the amount of duties and taxes payable immediately upon approval of goods declaration, and to provide for electronic payment of duties and taxes, as well as to allow for automatic payment upon approval of goods declaration. Next, please. So comparatively, the CPTF chapter in the new RCEP, if you look at this comparison, contains provisions that go beyond the existing WTO TFA, while recognizing the individual and diverse levels of development and economic needs of the RCEP parties. So some of these upgrades include release of goods within 48 hours and express consignments within 6 hours, advance rulings issued within 90 days and valid for at least 3 years. And this and the next few slides will show the comparison between the new RCEP against the TFA and the CPTPP chapter. Next slide, please. So for the TFA, the provisional requirement is provide for the release of perishable goods under normal circumstances within the shortest possible time. But for the CPTPP, there was no such clause. But under the new RCEP, there will be provision to provide for release under normal circumstances in the shortest possible time, and to the extent possible in less than 6 hours after the arrival of the goods and submission of the information required for release. But having said that, if you need to know that perishable goods sometimes may be subject to some phyto certification, so you must make sure that all these are completed and provided to the authorities before such release could be accommodated. For the rapid release of goods, to the extent possible under RCEP is within 48 hours, similar to the CPTPP. And also for express shipments is similar to the CPTPP, which is within 6 hours. There are no specific timeline and time frame under the TFA, which gives flexibility to parties to negotiate and determine the timeline or the time frame for such faster clearance of goods. Next slide, please. So with respect to risk management, the TFA requires that parties must adopt or maintain a risk management system to the extent possible. CPTPP make it a shall obligation. RCEP also make it a shall obligation. And for implementing single windows under the TFA is basically to endeavor to establish or maintain a single window, and to the extent possible and practicable to use information technology to support the single window. The CPTPP also provides endeavor to provide a facility that allows importers and exporters to electronically complete standardized requirements at a single entry point, not necessarily specifying that it should be a one system for all to allow such electronic transfer. And for RCEP, the provision is shall provide as appropriate advanced lodging of documents and information in electronic format for pre-arrival processing. So as I mentioned earlier, for advanced rulings, the TFA requires that it should cover minimally origin and classification provided in a reasonable time-bound manner and valid for a reasonable period of time. The CPTPP provides for origin and classification as well as the valuation in terms of advanced rulings. And the duration is no later than 150 days, valid for 3 years. Whereas the RCEP, the period is shorter, which is to be provided within 90 days and also valid for 3 years. Next slide, please. So these are the main comparison of the various FTAs with respect to the key elements of the CPTF, which is release of goods timing, express expedited shipments timing, advanced rulings coverage, advanced ruling service standards, advanced rulings validity. These are not the list of all the FTAs, but we've just highlighted here some examples. And you may wish to note that for the CSFTA upgrade, I think to some extent, the advanced ruling standard is shorter, like 60 days, whereas comparatively the others are 90 days or longer, 120 days, or even 150 days for all the origin, valuation, and classification. Okay, next slide, please. More examples of the other FTAs. You can see the various time frame and timeline. And you must note that this is with the timing is calculated based on upon completion or receipt of full documentation. Okay, not so necessarily upon submission. Okay, next slide, please. So to give you a preview, actually, we will not dwell into so much into RCEP, but just to give you a basic background. The RCEP will enter into force 60 days after the date on which at least 6 of the 10 ASEAN signatories and 3 of the 5 non-ASEAN signatories have completed their domestic procedures and notified the depository that they are ready. So Singapore has ratified it on 9 April. China has ratified it on 15 April. And to give you an update, I think Japan and Thailand had also recently ratified this agreement. So from now, that means we will need 4 more from ASEAN and 1 more from non-ASEAN before the RCEP can enter into force. It has to be after completion of all this ratification is within 60 days or 2 months. Okay. Of course, member states are targeting to have the RCEP to enter into force on 1st January 2022. Next slide, please. So to enhance our partnership with trade, customs, the Ministry of Trade and Industry and its agencies, such as the Enterprise Singapore, have regular exchanges with businesses to help us identify emerging areas that require customized facilitation, partner with the trading community to enhance supply chain security, and to promote utilization of free trade agreements to enhance Singapore's market access and competitiveness. Next slide, please. There are various channels for customs to engage traders and businesses and for companies to approach customs. We would encourage you to subscribe to our customs website to receive alerts on any new customs circulars or notices on trade regulatory changes, as well as customs new events. And importantly, we will also appreciate your feedback if you encounter any difficulty with respect to your shipment overseas and not consistent with what we have agreed under the respective FTAs. And of course, we have appropriate channel to go through the appropriate authorities to raise this issue. And if you could also feedback from your experience with respect to how the businesses are being conducted there and how does it affect your business in Singapore or overseas, that would be also useful for us to note. Okay, with that, I hope you have been enlightened on what is the WTO TFA and the customs chapters and trade facilitation. We can address some questions and answers at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Fauziah. Now let me invite our last speaker for the day, Ms. Priscilla, to share briefly on Tariff Finder. Hi, Priscilla, the floor is yours.
Hi, V. So thank you all for staying with us. I will be sharing on Tariff Finder, a complimentary tool from Enterprise Singapore. It is available free of charge for Singapore-based companies. You can find information on tariff rates and non-tariff trade measures, taxes, rules of origin for products. It is also a helpful tool if you are using or would like to use FTA in future. So during these sessions, I will briefly cover on the network of FTAs, the FTAs that Singapore has signed, quick overview of FTA, thus whether FTA applies to your business, and end off with a demo on how to use Tariff Finder. So to date, Singapore has signed 27 free trade agreements with 65 trading partners. RCEP, as shared by Mdm Fauziah earlier, RCEP is the latest FTA that Singapore had signed last year. So this agreement actually involves 15 countries. They are China, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea, and all 10 countries in ASEAN. And it is planned to enter into force by 2022. So a quick overview on the FTAs that your business can leverage on. So you can see from the table that ASEAN has signed quite a few FTAs. If you look at Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam, other than having ASEAN Plus FTA, they have also signed other mega FTAs such as the CPTPP and RCEP. So the ASEAN Plus FTAs here actually refers to the likes of ASEAN China, ASEAN India, and ASEAN Korea FTAs. The FTAs in red means that the country have signed the FTA, but they have yet to ratify it. So although CPTPP is already in force, we are unable to use this FTA to ship to Brunei and Malaysia, as they have yet to ratify this FTA. So what the businesses can do is to use ASEAN Plus FTA to ship to these countries. So the same applies to RCEP. It's not entered in force yet. So businesses can consider using the rest of the FTAs that are available. So you may ask, how does this vast network of FTAs actually help Singapore business? So by having different FTA with the same countries, such as let's say New Zealand here, who has 5 FTAs with Singapore, businesses can actually compare the preferential tariff rates among the FTAs or compare the rules of origin to see which agreement that their products can meet. So the advantage to this is that this provides some flexibilities for Singapore companies to utilize the most suitable FTAs for their businesses. And this is where Tariff Finder comes in handy, because the Tariff Finder is a tool that will provide all these information for the companies. Okay. So how does FTA applies to your business? So before a company embarks on the FTA journey, it should assess if FTA is necessary for their businesses. FTA applications takes time and resources, so the company should evaluate if they can really benefit from it. To start, your business can refer to this simple checklist to assess if FTA is really needed. So is your importer paying import duties on the products, and how much is that? If the import duties is already at 0%, then it is not necessary to utilize FTA. And is your product covered for tariff eliminations under a specific FTA? Could the tariff be lowered or eliminated completely under the FTA? There are also requirements to meet if you would like to use an FTA. So what are the rules of origin criteria, and can they be fulfilled? Sorry. So usually the importers would feedback to the sellers that they are paying import duties and request for FTA to be used. So how significant is the tariff savings if FTA is used? Sometimes the cost of applying for the FTA could be higher than the actual import duties paid. So the companies would need to weigh in on whether it is worth to use an FTA. And a few things to note is that each FTA is different, and so are the requirements. It is therefore important for the businesses to be familiar with the FTA and to be able to distinguish between them. If you have questions with regards to FTA, free trade agreements, you can actually send us an email. The email address will be shared in the chat box later. So later I will demo on how to use the Tariff Finder. So during the demo, I will use these 2 examples to show you the various functions and features of Tariff Finders. So first example would be using instant noodles that are manufactured in Singapore and exported to China under HS code 1902. We will search for the product code based on the nomenclature view. The second example would be the bassinet produced in Singapore that is exported to US under HS code 9403. And this time we will search by entering, we will search the product code based on the entire, by entering the entire HS code. Okay, so before I move on to the demo, I would like to share with you that you can access Tariff Finder either through Enterprise Singapore website or you can scan the QR code provided. If you'd like to know more about Tariff Finder, other than me sharing this session with you, you can go to the website and then read about it. And there's also a video provided by Enterprise Singapore on the tool. Okay, so without further ado, let me do the demo now. So this is the login page of Tariff Finder. I've already keyed my credentials. Sorry. So this is the homepage. So you will notice that there are two logos here, Enterprise Singapore and Vendor. So Vendor is a specialized data content provider in the field of global customs and foreign trade measures. Tariff Finder is a collaboration between Enterprise Singapore and Vendor to provide tariff and non-tariff measures information to Singapore businesses. So Tariff Finder covers 4 modules: nomenclatures, tariff and taxes, rules of origins, and import-export formalities. So if you hover over each module, there'll be a brief description on what it actually is. So for nomenclatures, it is important to identify the correct HS codes of your products so that you can get accurate information on the tariffs, rules of origins, and import-export formalities that are applicable to your products. So although tariffs are eliminated or lowered under FTAs, relevant taxes are still included in the findings. This will be useful for company to calculate the total landing cost that is required during exportations. And if an FTA is used, the company needs to be familiar with the rules of origin and be able to assess if their products meet the requirements. Tariff Finder provides high-level information on regulations and document requirements during importations. So the information that you can find here covers actually around 120 countries. So let's start with the demo. If you remember earlier, the first example we are going to demo on is on instant noodles produced in Singapore and exported to China. So originating country here means the place where the goods are manufactured in. So if you have goods that are imported into Singapore and then re-exported to another country, Singapore may not be the country of origin for the said products. So if you have problems with determining the origin of products, you can contact the FTA team SBF for more information. And as mentioned earlier, the email address can be found in the chat box. So let's just say that the instant noodles are produced in Singapore. So I key in Singapore here. And exported to China. And then we are going to search for the product codes by the nomenclature view. So the list of the products can be found under this commodity code catalog. And the list of products here goes by chapters. If you go down the list, you'll find that the products go from live animals to vegetables to manufactured goods, such as plastics, chemicals, and machinery. So this nomenclature list is actually structured by WCO, World Customs Organizations. There are around 5,000 commodity groups, and the list is refreshed every 5 years as new products enter the market. So let's search for instant noodles. Definitely not live animals, not vegetables. Could be under prepared foodstuff. So we just click on it, and then we go down the list. Definitely not meat or fish, not sugar, not cocoa. Could be preparations of cereals and flour. And we click on it. Not this, not pasta. It could be pasta. So we click on it as well. Not uncooked pasta. We click on others pasta. And you find instant noodles. So you just click on this. So once the product is selected, right, this is the result. So 19023030 is the HS code that will be accepted when the goods are exported into China. Okay, and you can see from here, it says Singapore exporting to China. And reads further, Singapore MFN rate 10%. So MFN rates actually stands for most favored nations. Any country that is a WTO member country could enjoy the same treatment, and then they would have to refer to this MFN rates for the tariff for the tariff rates. So it doesn't matter if it's Singapore or Vietnam or US, 10% would be imposed if you are a WTO member country. Okay. So the country listed here are actually the countries that China has signed an FTA with. So under China-Singapore FTA, the tariff rates could be 0%. And Singapore being part of ASEAN, this means that Singapore, the business can use ASEAN-China FTA for these shipments, and then also enjoy import duties of 0%. All right. So if you click further duty rates of China, you will find this additional duty USA 5%. So what does it mean? So due to US-China trade war, instant noodles from USA would have an additional duty of 5%. Thus, if let's say you are a US firm producing instant noodles and shipping to China, you would need to pay 10% plus 5%. That means a total of 15% of import duties when the goods are imported into China. Okay, and the list goes on for the rest of the country. So FTA does not eliminate taxes and charges. The importer in China will have to pay a rate of 13% of the duty paid value for the instant noodles exported from Singapore. Next is the rules of origin. So the rules of origins are laid out here according to the FTA. So here's the rules for ASEAN-China FTA, and here's for China-Singapore FTA. So under ASEAN-China FTA, there's an or rule. That means there is a regional value content or a change from any other chapters. That means the company, the business would need to fulfill only one of the criteria in order to use the FTA. The same goes for China-Singapore FTA. It's an or rule as well. The company will only need to fulfill one of the criteria. So what's interesting here is that the criteria for both FTA are different. So if let's say the company is unable to fulfill the RVC, regional value content, or a change from any other chapters under this ASEAN-China FTA, they can consider checking the rules of origin under China-Singapore FTA to see if they can fulfill this. If let's say they can fulfill wholly produced, then they can still ship to China using China-Singapore FTA. So vice versa, if they cannot meet the criteria of China-Singapore FTA, they can consider checking out ASEAN-China FTA and see if they can meet the criteria. So with two different sets of criteria, right, the company now has a flexibility of using one that they can fulfill. Okay, so next up is the import formalities information. If you notice, the HS code here only states 1902. So this means that info listed here will not be product specific, but more of a high level information on this particular category of the products. So this is a good place for you to check for general information, but it's always wise to always clarify with your importers for more in-depth understanding of the requirements. So let's just say that we open up bill of lading, which is the common documents required during shipments. So it provides information like it has to be issued in English, and then they also show you a sample of the documents. Okay, and we proceed to specific requirements. So I think the more interesting thing is these specific requirements of the products listed here. So I think these registrations for foreign exporters of particular food stuff is important for exporters to know. And then if you click here, so they have informations like, it is required for custom clearance, and then the application is to be completed in Chinese and English, and they provide the mode of the registration systems, the processing times, and then there's no processing fees. So all these information are high level information again, but then they can be useful for first time exporters into China, and then click further, you have an idea of how the registration site will look like. All right, so I hope I have provided a good overview of the tool. So let's proceed with the second example, which is on a bassinet produced in Singapore. So let's go back. So as usual, originating country Singapore, we are going to United States. And this time we're going to enter the full HS code for the bassinet, which is 9403. And then you just click on it. So this is the HS code when you export the US, and then it shows that Singapore exporting the US, and the MFN rate for this product is actually free. So this is good news. That means the exporters does not need to use FTA. Okay, and if you click further, you find this additional duty China. So due to the trade war again, goods exporting from China into US would have to pay 25% of FOB price. And then this thing, general tariff rates. This is the rates for other countries that do not enjoy preferential or most favored nation tariff treatments. So countries like Cuba and North Korea would have to pay duties of 40% of FOB price. So when you ship to US, you need to take note of the charges and the sales tax and charges. So it mentions here that the sales taxes will be levied at the consumer level and then will not be imposed during importations. Another thing to note is the merchandising processing fee. You'll find that the goods could be exempted from this fee if US-Singapore FTA is used. So even though FTA is not required because MFN rate is 0, but if you want to get your products exempted from these MPF fees, you would need to apply for the FTA. Okay, so when you apply for FTA, then you have to check the rules of origins. So these rules of origin here is a little bit more complicated from the previous example. So businesses will need to understand or need to be familiar with the different rules of origins of the FTA and then study in details, to ensure that the requirements can be met. So another thing that I like to bring attention to is this interesting bit here, specific requirements. And it says import license for wildlife, import permit for protected plants and products, etc. So if let's say you click on this, it says that this license is required if let's say the product contains products of endangered animals or plants. So if your bassinet contains products of endangered animals or plants, then the company would need to apply for this import license. So especially for Singapore manufacturers who usually import raw materials from overseas, you would need to check if your you would need to check with your supplier if the raw materials actually contains products of endangered animals or plants. So with all these informations, right, instead of companies going to the internet to search for information on specific requirements of their products, they can actually use Tariff Finder as a page start, to check on such requirements to avoid any non-compliance. And then you can find the copies of the paper application forms that you can get from the US and how the import license will look like. All right, so that's all for my demo on Tariff Finder. I hope information sharing has been beneficial for you. So I would like to go back to this page again. So do sign up for Tariff Finder. Oops. Do sign up for Tariff Finder. It's free of charge, and I think it's a very useful tool for Singapore businesses who intend to expand overseas, and then also make use of FTA. Thank you. Over to you, Ivy.
Thank you, Priscilla. I hope all of you have enjoyed this presentation. Now is the time for Q&A. Okay, we received quite a few questions. Okay, the first question, I would like to pose it to Rajiv. There's a question from one of the participants. Does it mean that Singapore will not issue a back-to-back PCO based on another back-to-back PCO? So he meant that, taking example, the goods flow under ACFTA from Thailand to Malaysia, Malaysia to Singapore, and Singapore to China. Will Singapore issue a back-to-back based on Malaysia back-to-back PCO?
Hi, based on the question, okay, so Singapore issues the back-to-back PCO in accordance to the ASEAN-China operational certification procedure. So if you do view the operational certification procedure, you can find this criteria under Rule 12. So if you notice, what Rule 12 states is that the back-to-back can only be issued based on the first leg proof of origin or Form E. So in your case, because the first leg proof of origin or the Form E is issued by the first country, which in your case is, if I'm not wrong, is it Thailand?
Yes, correct.
Yes, correct. So the first leg Form E is issued by Thailand. Then subsequently it goes to Malaysia to be issued with a back-to-back and then comes to Singapore. So in that case, Singapore cannot issue a back-to-back based on a back-to-back first proof of origin. It has to be a first leg proof of origin. But having said that, I mean, there are other options that you can choose to go like a certificate of non-manipulation, but that is something maybe we can discuss offhand.
Okay, thank you, Rajiv. There's also another question for you, Rajiv. One of the participants raised that when we choose to take third-party billing, can we choose not to show the price of the cargo on the Form D or the Form E? As the applicant, FTA will be my supplier with their selling price to my company, but we will sell at a markup rate to my end client, and I do not wish to expose my price.
So what I'm guessing is that your third-party invoicing price is slightly higher than the FOB price that you have declared during the point of submission of your cost statement. So in that case, I mean, Singapore Customs does not regulate what price you should sell to your customer. But if you do want to indicate if you do go under the RBC criteria and it requires you to indicate the FOB price that you've submitted to us has to be indicated in the Form D. It does not have to be the markup price that you sell to your customer. This is entirely it's a business arrangement between you and your customer, which we don't really get involved in. But the FOB price that you have indicated to us has to be stated in the Form D or Form E.
Understand, Rajiv. Okay, I have one last question for you before I move on to the next speaker. What if the origin declaration that's supposed to be dispatched to my customer is lost in transit?
Okay, if it's lost in transit, you can then apply for a certified true copy with Singapore Customs. So the procedure is whereby you will need to purchase the back-to-back. You need to purchase a certificate of origin from any of the print. If it's a hard copy Form D, you need to purchase the back-to-back from any of the printing service bureau. Then subsequently, you will need to populate the same information that was populated in the lost certificate of origin. You will need to bring it down to Singapore Customs, and you will certify true copy.
Okay, thank you, Rajiv. I'll move on to Mdm Fauziah. There's one question on the advanced ruling. The advanced ruling that you mentioned seems very useful, but do businesses apply with Singapore Customs to importing country customs, or actually businesses needs to apply with each and individual importing country customs?
I guess it depends on the application of the shipment itself, whether it's going to be imported into country A or country B, or it will be going into multiple countries through transit. So in that sense, whichever is required, usually is the final leg of the importing country. So you need to obtain the advanced ruling from that authority in the importing country. Okay. And of course, all the relevant documents must be provided.
Okay, so which means that if the importing country is to USA, so the businesses needs to apply the advanced ruling with the US Customs.
Yeah. Okay, I also would like to clarify with the statement I made earlier that in addition to China and Singapore, Japan and Thailand have ratified the RCEP. Actually, they are in the process of ratifying. They have not really officially submitted their ratification. So at the moment, we still have 2 countries that have ratified, which is China and Singapore. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. As we are running out of time, I apologize if I'm not able to answer to post all the questions, but not to worry, we will reply the questions via email. I'll post one last question to Priscilla. There's one question who asks, how frequently are the info in the Tariff Finder updated?
Hello, hi. Okay, you can actually view from here. Okay, you can see my screen. So, so you can see that it's actually there's these recent updates. You can see all the different updates by member, and you can see all the countries listed here. So if let's say you have a particular countries of interest, you can always refer to this list and see if there's any changes or updates for revise of any nomenclatures change or tariff rates, all these things for their particular countries. So this is the view that you can check from. Okay.
Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you, everybody. It's a great pleasure to have all of you with us today. For this, I conclude the webinar. Once again, I apologize if you are not able to answer all the questions, but rest assured that we'll reply your questions via email. So before you leave the webinar, I would appreciate if you can help us to provide your feedback. And again, should you have any question, please kindly send your query to fta@sbf.org.sg. Thank you all for attending, and we hope you have learned and enjoyed our webinar series. Thank you. Bye.